Hello, everyone, and welcome to my Daredevil Season 3 summary and review. Hope everyone is doing well. And my currently the only audience member that I know is watching is Alice Morgan. Hello, Alice. Hope you're doing well. I will kill a couple of seconds waiting to see if anybody else shows up. So I just finished last night binging all the way through, God, 8 or 9 episodes, something like that, of the remaining episodes of season 3 that I hadn't finished through from Friday through Saturday. And as a brief overview of my experience with the season, I was well pleased and actually pleasantly surprised. So I guess I better back up. In preparation for season 3, I rewatched season 1, season 2, and The Defenders in order to make sure I had myself all the way caught up on all the events and characters and side notes and everything else as much as I possibly could leading up to season 3. And let's see. So season 1 of Daredevil it's sort of like Iron Man, the first Iron Man movie. It set the bar for what shows on Netflix in that universe and in that style would have to hit, insofar as quality of storytelling and acting, pacing, and structure. For the most part, none of the other Marvel Netflix series have reached that bar. Luke Cage season 1 did a pretty good job for like perhaps the first half or so until they killed off Cottonmouth. I should also preface, this will be full of nothing but spoilers, both for Daredevil and probably some of the other Netflix shows. So if you haven't gotten that deep into the Netflix universe and you don't want anything spoiled for you, I'd suggest not listening to this until after you've dived in a bit to the other shows. And hello, this is Kyle. Hello, nothing for you here. Grave Danger, Emperor W.R. Costin, Rolling Bear, Beth Castleman. Castleman? How are you guys doing? So watching season 1 again reminded me of what you can do with 13 episodes and how you can make every episode matter, how you can have side plots that don't feel like they're filler, etc. It's just the excellence of Daredevil season 1, not only as a story, but also as a superhero story, as an origin story, as a character study, both of Daredevil and of Kingpin, or Wilson Fisk, as he was mostly known as. It just reminded me, I hadn't watched it in about a year or two, and it just reminded me just like how good these shows could be, and as well underlined just how much of in relative terms, the other shows had failed to match that level of quality. Season 2 of Daredevil was kind of a mixed bag. I've gone into great depth on my thoughts on the Punisher version in the Netflix series in my previous reviews. So I won't go too much into that, at least into the Punisher. But I will say that my biggest problem with season 2 was that it was half a Daredevil show and half a Punisher origin story show. And setting aside my problems with the Punisher iteration this time around, there were whole segments of that season involving the Punisher that had absolutely nothing to do with Daredevil. It might as well have been only about a half a Daredevil season. And I suppose for the sake of the story they were trying to tell, that kind of worked. It took some pressure off the people trying to tell the Daredevil story, and they were off doing Punisher stuff. And when the two stories intermingled, it kind of worked, but a lot of it felt kind of shoehorned at the same time. So the Daredevil seasons 1, 2, and 3 so far feel to me like the mirror image of the Batman trilogy by Christopher Nolan. Batman Begins and Dark Knight Rises to me were as far as Batman movies go. But The Dark Knight, the middle movie, was probably the most perfect Batman movie. It didn't rely on the first movie. It basically had nothing to do with the second movie. It was a self-contained, wonderful portrayal of the characters and the Joker, the whole 9 yards. It was great. Standalone, wonderful. In contrast, Daredevil season 1 and 3 are on par with each other for the most part. Season 3 has a little bit less going for it in the sense that it's not as fresh and new like the origin story of season 1, but insofar as storytelling and structure and drama and tension and character study, season 3 is right up there with season 1. Okay, whereas season 2 is kind of the weaker. Now, in between all that, of course, was The Defenders, which might as well have been Daredevil season 2.5, for as much as the Defenders storyline had to do with either Luke Cage or Jessica Jones, and only a little bit with Danny Rand. It was basically an extension of what was going on in Daredevil season 2 and some trail-offs of the things set up in season 1 of Daredevil, especially the Black Sky and all that. Defenders was a bit of a tough watch because it was boring in places. The characterizations, especially of Danny Rand and his insufferable childishness and tantrums, it just reminded me how much I hated season 1 of Iron Fist again. I mean, the fight scenes were good. The Daredevil stuff, for the most part, was good. That first episode where you sort of get the gist that they're filming each of these characters with their own color filter. The Daredevil portions were well shot and well framed and, very, very evocative of season 1. But anyway, that's all preamble. Let me look at the chat again real quick. Hello, Random American. Hello, Earl Walton. Corey, hello. Billy Batson, hello. Random American wants a quick take. Random American quick take is, it is a sliver less in quality than season 1, but that is not an insult. It's great. Season 3 is great. Hell, for the most part, you could just ignore season 2 and watch season 1 and season 3 together as sort of a continuity of one another. There's plenty of stuff in season 2 that informs things that go on in season 3. And obviously The Defenders is a direct precursor to the events of season 3, but what goes on there is not dwelled on too much. So it's great. That's all I'll say. As a quick take, it's wonderful. They hit everything just about on the head as they should. And the people running that show, not only do they love the source material, but they respect it. And that's a rare thing given some of the other Netflix presentations. So, as with all my other reviews, I'm not going to go episode by episode and giving a plot summary for each one. I'm just going to talk about the characters, the characterization, some of the events, the things I really liked, and some of the things that I didn't like so much. Now, that part of it's going to be relatively short because overall, I loved this season. They did all the characters justice as far as I'm concerned. And again, I'm not the biggest Daredevil fan. Like, I'm not some kind of purist that would be able to tell a lot of inconsistencies and things. But I do own many comics with Daredevil. I know a lot of the backstory from other things. I actually own the issue where Bullseye first appears. The actual comic book issue, not a reprint, the original. And I also own the issue wherein Bullseye kills Elektra in the comic books. So I do have a little bit of a love for some of those characters and a little bit of knowledge of their backstories and such. So that being the case, what do we have? Well, overall, so at the end of Defenders, we didn't know if Matt Murdock was still alive, or at least that was the gist. The building they were under collapsed with Daredevil down there with Elektra. We find out at the beginning of season 3, well, I should say the post-credits scene, quote unquote, of Defenders was we saw Matt Murdock lying injured in a bed at what appeared to be a church with a nun overlooking him. But how he got from beneath a collapsed building to the church, he was washed out in a sewer pipe. A little bit of a, well, it's a comic book. But I didn't have a problem with it. It's a little bit too convenient, but hey, what are you going to do? That's how it works. And that was the only real fantastical element of the first episode. But Matt Murdock ends up recuperating over at St. Agnes's, I think it was, the same church and orphanage where he grew up. Um, and it becomes very obvious. Now, I know bits and pieces of the Born Again storyline on which most of the season is based, but I didn't know all the details. I don't own any of the comic books. I just know sort of referentially. So there were a lot of finer details that I could only guess at as things proceeded. It was obvious very, very, very quickly after watching season one who Matt's mother was. I mean, it was telegraphed pretty quickly that Sister Maggie was Matt's mother. So I was making jokes the whole time to my friend about like, thanks, Mom, every time she showed up, even though they hadn't actually revealed that yet. There was one inconsistency that I spotted early on. Oh, first off, if you watch the opening to the season, I'm talking about the opening to the episodes, the actual opening sequence with the credits and everything. If I'm not mistaken, and I don't think I am, when it gets to the point in the opening sequence where the angel is sitting in front of the church, unlike the previous seasons where I believe her hands were clasped together in prayer, now one hand is over her face as though in shame or something. And they did alter the opening sequence a little bit to allow for the writer and the director's names to come after the title. So I think they also revised the angel to sort of reflect the grim and dour nature of the storyline and the state of our hero as we go into the season. But anyway, early on in the season, we find out in flashbacks that Matt and the priest, Father, it's not Lamont. I want to say Lamont, but it's something like that. Anyway, that they had a very close relationship as Matt was growing up, like almost a, mentor kind of situation. And if I'm not mistaken, in season one of Daredevil, when the priest is first introduced, they kind of play it off as though Matt and the priest aren't well acquainted with each other outside of the confessional. I could be mistaken, but when they first talk outside of the confessional for the first time that we see, the priest says something to the effect of, how could I forget Matt or Batlin Jack Murdoch's boy or something like that. It just seemed a bit impersonal. And again, if I'm remembering it correctly, given how relatively close a relationship was portrayed in the flashbacks in season 3. I don't know if that's a retcon. I don't know if I'm misremembering something from season 1. That kind of threw me off for a second when they started showing that he was practically raised by the priest, as along with the nuns and everything. So Matt Murdoch is presumed dead, and he's recuperating in this church. He starts out the show in a way a lot of superhero stories do when you're trying to sort of reset the character or bring them back down to earth for a while. He's injured to the point where his powers don't work, really. He can't smell anything. One of his ears is completely wrung out. So he's essentially, for the first couple episodes, a blind man without any kind of super abilities. So that, brings the character down a few notches and has to sort of relearn how to be who he was and retrain, kind of thing. It's a common device. You see that in a lot of video games, like, oh, what am I thinking of? Well, in any video game where in the first game you were somebody who leveled up all your powers and everything, like God of War, where he becomes the God of War. And then in God of War 2, he gets cast out of Olympus, basically, and reduced back down to basically a mortal. Taking your superhero and cutting them down back to basics again is a common device to sort of reboot a character or to set them on a new path and a new storyline. And this is very true here. He's believed dead. He thinks that he needs to. I mean, he doesn't see what the point of him being Daredevil is anymore now that he's lost all his abilities. Now that Elektra's dead again. Every time he makes any headway in life, he seems to get struck upside the head. So he starts questioning his faith, his purpose in life, the benevolence of God, and all that kind of thing. It's very dour. It's very sad in a way. It's very depressing. I will say, though, and I know that some people might argue with me on this, the writers and the actors, especially Charlie Cox, they got down and dark, but not emo. I never felt like Matt Murdock got to the point of being like melodramatically depressed. Like there was a logic to all of his cynicism and his depression and his sort of self-destructive impulses over the course of things. And that is a very tricky thing to pull off, especially in something like a superhero show where, a lot of superhero shows rely on a kind of melodrama kind of stuff. And it's not like it's completely absent here, but I never felt like I was being put on or I had to like groan, like, oh God, roll my eyes kind of drama queen kind of stuff. Never felt like that. They did an excellent job of really bringing this character down to his absolute bottom, sort of like an alcoholic hits his bottom. They did a good job in that. Back to the chat briefly. Let's see. Billy Batson says, I liked it, although for some reason I did not like Karen Page. Earl says Dex was in beast mode. Billy Batson says, I actually like Agent Hadim. His plot line is pretty good. Yeah, so there's several things going on here. The main thrust of the story is that Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, which he finally gets his code name in this show, however briefly, he decides to cut a deal. He wants to save Vanessa, his betrothed, from any criminal prosecution or anything. So he decides to cut a deal with the FBI in order to, grant her immunity, and he'll just, give up what he knows about criminal organizations and such. Now, of course, this is all part of a master plan. It's all part of a long game arranged plan that Fisk has been, puppet stringing since basically when he got into prison. And if you saw Daredevil season 2, you got a hint of him starting to lay the groundwork for that in season 2. The short version is he has systematically blackmailed and cornered a massive numbers of FBI agents to the point where they have no choice but to work for him unless they want their lives or their loved ones destroyed. And our main avatar into the world of the FBI this time around is Agent Nadeem. Now, very much unlike the first season of The Punisher, where the Homeland Security government aspect of it was practically its own show, Daredevil season 3 integrates Agent Nadeem, the FBI and law enforcement aspect so well into the show that, and this isn't an insult, a lot of the times it doesn't feel like a superhero show as much as it feels like sort of a police thriller kind of thing, a Law and Order kind of conspiracy thriller. They did a really great job balancing out the sort of real world stuff from the superhero stuff, making the superhero stuff just feel part of the landscape and not like it was, tacked on to something more grounded just to try to make it seem more grounded. It seemed like everything fit together. And that is also a result of some really good groundwork laid down in season 1 and season 2 that doesn't make the idea of a Daredevil character or his abilities or anything else feel all that much out of place in the Daredevil world. Because unlike the other characters like Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and Iron Fist, Daredevil doesn't have any flashy, outlandish superpowers like being bulletproof or bending metal or having a glowing fist. Save for his sense abilities, he's, Joe Average, run around of the mill kind of guy. In everything except, the fact that he can heal from practically everything and, is blind otherwise. So yeah, Agent Nadeem, I had thought that this was going to weigh too heavily on, I really feared there was going to be some kind of, moralizing during the show about, law enforcement and, innocent people being hurt by law. There's going to be some kind of like, political commentary about that kind of stuff. And there really wasn't, at least nothing that really stood out to me as overwrought. There were some sort of under the current comments about the media versus those in power, which kind of harkens to Trump versus the media. It never got that heavy-handed, but there was a couple of spots where a little bit of commentary came in, and I was kind of like, guys, let's not dwell on that too much. And they didn't, thankfully. Anyway, so Wilson Fisk has been preparing basically to spring himself from prison in a legitimate fashion while also getting his revenge on Daredevil for having put him in prison and everything. And it's all this Machiavellian, who can you trust, the twists and the turns of who's a reliable character versus somebody who's going to betray, following Agent Nadim into this hole he ends up digging for himself after a fashion. I thought his wife, as portrayed, was a bit too bitchy. She ended up being, a good guy wife at the end, but over the course of things, it's like, you promised you'd never lie to me. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy's an FBI agent. He deals with a lot of crazy stuff. You knew what you were marrying when you found out he's going to be an FBI guy. If he wants to keep some of the horrors of his job away from you, maybe that's just his way of having a life outside of the job. Now, I understand they were trying to mirror a little bit of the same conversation that takes place between Wilson Fisk and Vanessa later on when she finally does arrive. I mean, I was wondering for the longest time, are we ever going to see Vanessa again? Is this just a tease? When she finally does arrive, she gives Wilson Fisk a similar sort of tirade, although much more gently, that she wants to be a part of his life and not just sort of a witness to his life. There's a lot of symmetries going on between relationships and husband and wife, siblings, that kind of stuff. So Agent Nadim and the whole FBI thing, it never felt tacked on. It never felt out of place. It always felt integral to the plot. I never felt like I was watching a completely separate type of TV show, unlike The Punisher season 1. So anyway, Wilson Fisk has, Svengali'd his way to get out of prison and basically into a secluded place where he can give the FBI all the information he has on criminal organizations so that they can take down these criminal organizations. And of course, he's doing this just to better himself. And when Matt and Foggy and Karen all find out that Fisk is getting out of jail, basically, they feel like all their efforts are for naught. This guy's going to get away with it again. And then we start the a more hyped up version of what was going on near the end of season 1 of Daredevil, where, the struggle with how do you stop someone so evil, so manipulative, so seemingly untouchable unless you kill him. And so the question becomes for the entire season is, if Matt gets a shot at killing Wilson Fisk, is he going to do it? Because Daredevil to this point doesn't kill. He can beat somebody to a pulp, take him close, but he doesn't kill anybody. He doesn't take a life. He's not a murderer. And, that was played out in season 1 and season 2 with his struggles against the Punisher. So is he going to break that promise now? But the other star of this season, and I got to say, I could have seen so many ways they could have fucked this up, but man, they bring in Bullseye. Of course, he's not Bullseye yet. He doesn't have that name. Benjamin Poindexter, one of the many aliases Bullseye had in the comic books, but they've settled on this as his real name. He is a special agent in the FBI. I can't go into too many details because it would take forever, but they do such a smooth job of not only introducing the character, but explaining his psychology. The way they do it in flashbacks is a little artsy. They hadn't quite done something like that in previous seasons, but I was fine with it. And again, it was really a character study. That's been the one hallmark of the good seasons of Daredevil, is where you really get into the mind of the individual players in this. In season one, you got in the mind of Matt Murdock, and you took time to get into the mind of Wilson Fisk. And to a point, you could understand both, even though you knew one was the bad guy and one was the good guy. In some ways, you could almost kind of see where Wilson Fisk was coming from. Not empathize to the point of thinking him as a hero, but almost kind of understand where he's coming from, which is, that's the best way to present your villain, where you can almost empathize with them a little bit. You can kind of see their perspective. In Bullseye's case, they do lead the audience around by the nose a little bit in some of the higher points of his psychology, but then you kind of have to when you're dealing with things on the mental plane. They use the flashbacks with his therapist, and the therapist is kind of our vehicle into his mind in a more direct and literal sense as she talks to him about his problems growing up as a kid and basically being a psychopath and having no problem killing people. They don't dwell too much or too long on his talents with being able to throw things at marksman-like speed and deadliness. They just kind of show that he can do it, and they move on. They don't take a lot of time to dwell on that or try to explain it or try to say it's a mutant power or something like it's. I believe it's hinted at in the comic books or something. He just is a really good shot, and he's really good at throwing things. And watching the manipulation of Poindexter, or Dex as he's known, by Wilson Fisk into becoming his personal weapon is really dark, really great. I don't know what else to say. The guy who played Bullseye did a really excellent job. I think his last name is Bethel. I heard somewhere that he had auditioned to play Captain America in the Marvel Cinematic Universe at one point. But he is perfectly cast here. Looking at him and what I know of the character from the comic books, it was a 1-to-1 match. I wouldn't have imagined him looking any different or acting any different were he to be portrayed on film. It was really a credit to the creators and the actor that they got that guy down pat, and it really felt like Bullseye. What else? So what we also find out, we also have a payoff with Karen Page. So Karen Page, there was always the thing hanging over her head since season one. When is her having killed Wesley going to come up? And also, what was this sketchy past of hers that Ben Urich hinted at in season one? All of that gets paid off in season three. It's kind of nice that they didn't give it all away in season one or season two, but just kind of, nudged at it here and there. But we finally find out what happened with Karen in her past. And the one thing they never really explained, she was fluent in Spanish in season one, and it was always kind of surprising to people around her because she never gave an explanation like, she was took Spanish in high school or something like that. I don't think anyway. And so I had thought that maybe something about that would come out, but I never really did. But her use of a firearm, her knowledge of some of the underworld and seedier sides of life kind of thing, that was all explained in what could have been a filler episode. I mean, there's a lot of things in some of these shows that I call filler episodes, and I don't think that's a very unique way of putting it, but episodes where not much happens or nothing really happens that drives the plot forward, but is just sort of there to take up time, or you have some overwrought conversations that sort of just take up minutes in the show. We have a flashback episode that basically describes Karen Page's origin story, or at least the events that led her to where she was in Daredevil when we start out in season one. It kept me engaged. It kept me interested. It was something that I probably would have been interested to watch on its own, even if it had nothing to do with Daredevil, because the acting was so good and the setup was so good. I always forget his name, but Karen's dad is played by the guy from Oz, Beecher. I always forget the real character's name. His name's like Turgeson or something, Torgeson. I forget his last name. He also played Chet in the TV's version of Weird Science, if you ever saw that. But anyway, great acting there. The story behind, what happened to her and why she is the way she is. It was really well done. It was like a family drama. It was a little snippet of like what could be its own show after a fashion, but it was just 3/4 of an episode. And I didn't feel like it was filler. I mean, it was obviously giving backstory that wasn't technically necessary to explain things, but it did flesh out some stuff about her, and also was a payoff to a comment she made in season 1 when she's about to kill Wesley. Like she says, "You think this is the first time I've ever shot anybody?" And it wasn't. But we also finally get the payoff of her looking Fisk in the eye and telling him that she killed Wesley, which I had been praying for something like that for 2 seasons. I was just like, God, I want him to look this little blonde lady in the eyes as she tells him that she killed his best friend. And we get it. It was great. I was like, yes, finally. So there's a lot of things that people who've been paying attention to the previous seasons will get some payoff on. Now, there is one odd moment in the season. I'm not quite sure how to process this. So if you've watched season 1, one of the sort of power objects of Wilson Fisk was this painting that basically brought him and Vanessa together for the first time, a rabbit in a snowstorm. And one of the plot points as Wilson Fisk is setting up his new headquarters in this hotel is retrieving that painting to be added amongst the collection. I'll pause momentarily to get to the chat real quick. Let's see. Billy Batson says, he's the only Catholic priest that didn't touch little boys. Yeah, I made a joke about that when we were watching, and I was like, hey, sit down close to this Catholic priest. Captain Bramble says, hi, Scribe Light, stuck at work, so I'm just dropping by to say hello. Hello, Captain Brambles. Hello, Jaster Mariel. How's it going? Let's see. Peter, the real Peter says, but this show is inclusive and diverse. That's what's important. Yeah, there was a lot of inclusion and diversity in the show, but thankfully they never, evangelized on it. It was just there. I mean, it was only part of the characters for the most part when there was quote unquote diverse, whatever you want to call it. But there was never any proselytizing, and I appreciated that. There were little hints here and there, sort of social commentary about the press and people in power and things like that. But you kind of had that in season 1 as well, so it was fine. I nothing stood out to me. I never felt like I was being talked down to by anybody in the show. It all flowed very well. Let's see. Earl Walton says, I usually agree with Razor Fist, but he called this season a SJW love fest. I didn't see it. I didn't see it either. I mean, okay, if you want to say that, Agent Nadeem, well, he was Hindu, I think it was, or Indian, and that's social justice. It's like, no, it's just a character. And, the only times that his culture or anything came up was amongst the family scenes. But even then, if Agent Nadeem had been Hispanic or German or something, and just occasionally he and his wife talked in their native language, it would have had functionally no difference depending no matter what nationality you gave him. It never became an issue, or it was never brought up as one. You never had some kind of office politics thing where they were like, oh well, it's very gratifying to see someone, a person of color, in your position. They never did that stuff. It was just like you could have put anybody in there. It was just an aspect to that character that fleshed him out a little bit as a human being. It had nothing to do with political commentary, so far as I could tell. Let's see. Trying to Kill Sometimes says, I'm glad I like Daredevil and was going to pick Netflix up just for season 3, but Razor Fist had me all spooked about it. Well, I don't know what Razor Fist said. I haven't watched his review or anything, but I'll tell you what, after season 1 and season 2, season 3 is just as good as season 1. Insofar as, like I say, the characters and everything else. Season 3 does give more fan service than season 1, but I think it's earned it at that point. And what I mean by that is, we finally see Wilson Fisk dressed like the Kingpin. He's been dressed either in regular suits and such, or prison orange and everything in season 2, but he finally just lets loose and puts on everything but the cravat. That's the one. That's the one thing that he doesn't do, because a joke was made in season one about how a cravat was a bit too much. He practically has it, but he doesn't. He also doesn't have the diamond headed walking stick. I was hoping. I was wondering, are they going to go that far? They didn't go that far. But the shiny white suit, he looked like the Kingpin. I tell you what, Vincent D'Onofrio just nails it. I know some people had some problems with the way he sort of belted out his lines and everything in season one, but you know, just seeing him made me so happy. It was like, God damn it, that is the fucking Kingpin made flesh. I was so happy. Anyway, but yeah, so anyway, as I was talking about the rabbit in the snowstorm painting. So for a lot of the season, there's sort of this side thing about, that one wall in his lair being blank, sort of being reserved for the rabbit in the snowstorm painting. And we're told that somebody else got possession of it while he was in prison. And there's this scene where Wilson Fisk goes off to the owner of the painting, a woman who will not sell, apparently. And the woman's played by Leslie Ann Warren. And as soon as I saw her, I thought, hey, I remember you. You're Miss Scarlet from Clue. And it took me a minute to remember her name. I was like, yeah, Leslie Ann Warren. And she has aged gracefully. I tell you what, I mean, yeah, she's older, but I knew exactly who she was. And I was just like, God, she's got some good genes in her. I tell you what. Anyway, Wilson Fisk sits down with this lady and finds out that, yeah, it's her painting. Not only is it her painting, it was her painting before Wilson Fisk got it because it belonged to her family. It was taken from her family by the Nazis back in World War II. So it's, it was the spoils of Nazi conquest, and now it's back with her and its rightful place in her family. So she goes through this long sort of soliloquy talking about, what the meaning of that painting to her and the tragedy of her family and the camps and all that stuff. And Wilson Fisk is sitting across there. And she even looks at him and says, I know a monster when I see one, or something like that. And you're just as bad as the Nazis, she basically says. And Wilson Fisk gives up. He says, no, you're right. I'm out of here. And he lets her keep the painting. He says something to the effect of, Vanessa would want me to let you have it, or something like that. And I'm thinking, what was the point of this scene? Was the point of this scene to make us think that Wilson Fisk is a bad guy, but he's not as bad as the Nazis? Wilson Fisk is a bad guy, but, never mind the fact that he murdered an innocent old woman to take control of an apartment building. Never mind the fact that he cut a guy's head off with a car door. Never mind the fact that multiple people have been murdered in his name or by his hand over the course of the last 2 seasons or whatever, without him giving a shit, just for the sake of his own advancement in the world. But this is where he draws the line, taking a painting from a Nazi Holocaust survivor because of her story of what the painting meant to her and her family. Really? It was so out of place. And I was bewildered. I was like, okay, that was odd. And then, the scene ends and that's kind of it. Until later on, when the painting appears in the apartment after Vanessa has arrived, and we find out that Poindexter, Bullseye, he went off and acquired it from the old lady in one final offer. Basically, he killed her for it. And when Fisk finally sees the painting and wonders how did it get there, because he intended for it to stay with the lady, he just kind of shrugs off when he realizes, my henchman went off and killed this lady on my behalf to get my painting back. And so I thought, so what are we trying to say here? That Wilson Fisk is at least more compassionate than a Nazi, but Poindexter isn't. I just, what? It was just a very odd sort of dynamic going on there. I didn't quite understand. I don't want to say it was bad writing or something. It just didn't make a whole lot of sense as to what message I was supposed to take away from that. So that was one of the only weak points of the season. The other weak point of the season is the introduction suddenly of Foggy's brother Theo. Now, I could be mistaken. I might be, but no sibling was ever mentioned of Foggy's prior to this. And when he finally does show up, He's an idiot. He ends up being an idiot who somehow tries to hold Foggy to account for stupid decisions he made, which Foggy has to deal with because there's no way around it. And I was just like, okay, I get we're doing a sibling-ish thing here. We got some mirroring between Vanessa and Fisk and Nadeem and his wife. We have some mirroring between Foggy and his brother and Karen and her brother, and the family obligations to an establishment. Karen and to her dad's diner, Foggy to his parents' butcher shop. There's a lot of little back and forths going on, but I don't know, the addition of Theo to the whole thing, I just thought was, okay, now we have a brother we have to deal with. Thankfully, he's not in the show too much, except to sort of throw wrenches into things, I guess, and sort of show a contrast between what Foggy could have been versus what he became, because he always talked about in the earlier seasons about how he could have been a butcher. And that's another thing, too. Watching season 1, 2, Defenders, and 3 back to back, you really see the development of some of these characters. They're not static. Foggy evolves between season 1 and season 3. Marcy, Foggy's girlfriend, even though she's not a major character, she has a great evolution between season 1 and season 3. Matt obviously has a big evolution from season 1 to the pits of season 3 and then back up again. I think Karen is the only one who doesn't really change much. She's always kind of secretive, kind of down, kind of out of sorts. She has a lot of crazy, horrible things happen to her in this season. But the only sort of evolution you see is from where she was in the flashback episode, where you see her time before New York. And then you kind of see where she ended up by the time you get to season 1 and onward. So I'm not sure that she evolves all that much. Fisk doesn't seem to evolve all that much, and Vanessa is, of course, his Lady Macbeth. We already kind of knew that from season 1, so when she takes this really dark turn for a moment in season 3, it's not much of a surprise to me, because she was standing in front of the windows with Wilson Fisk in season 1 watching the city blow up, and she didn't seem to mind, or she was very impressed with it. So yeah, that didn't really feel like much of a change there. And spoiler alert, Daredevil doesn't kill Fisk. He works out kind of a deal with him at the end, a deal with the devil, if you would. But there was one thing about the conclusion of the season that didn't quite track with me. Okay. I'm going to go back to the chat real quick before I get to that. Let's see. Tyler Lalonde says, what was her backstory? Oh, so Karen, prior to New York, was a drug addict, kind of a drug dealer. She worked at her dad's diner that was really run down and was kind of going out of business. And she was kind of trying to keep her family afloat after a fashion, but irresponsibly so, since their mother died of cancer. She had a younger brother. And it all came to a head when Karen had a chance to go to college, but she's being held back by this druggy dealer boyfriend of hers. Her brother tries to defend her from the drug dealer. There's a fight. Karen's high. She tries to get her brother away from there. There's a car accident. Her brother dies. She's basically exiled from her father. And, that's her deep, dark past. She also shot her ex-boyfriend in the arm after her ex-boyfriend tried to beat the shit out of her brother. So it's a very sort of dim, bleak life story for Karen prior to getting to New York. It explains some things about how she behaves and some other things about her character that we see previously in the series. But I like I said, as a family drama, as a little snippet kind of thing, since it was so self-contained, I liked it fine. It was a little bit of filler. It was a little bit of backstory that wasn't necessary. But again, it gave some more insight into the character, and that's been the strength of the series, has been character studies, either in really in-depth stuff or really trying to get into their heads. All you need says, just stopping in to wish you a good stream. Can't stay. Later, guys. Bye. All you need. Earl Walton says, I think that he went in that house going to get that painting no matter what he had to do, but her story, along with the thought of what Vanessa would think, saved her life. Doug Dog says, Leslie Ann Warren, any relation to Pocahontas? I don't believe so. I think Leslie Ann Warren is her own person, but who knows? And there could be a Warren family tree out there somewhere. Well, Earl, I get that's what the show was telling us, But the problem is that again, it didn't seem to track with the kind of person Wilson Fisk has been presented to us. He's willing to murder little old ladies to get what he wants. And having some little old lady give him a sob story, I don't know. Him and Ben Urich and everything else. I understand she wasn't, actively threatening him like maybe you thought Ben Urich was, and he wasn't under pressure from Nobu to get that built, the apartment building and such. I don't know. It just seemed like a very odd sort of moment for him to show compassion, I guess, given everything else that was going on. But anyway, so one of the things near the end of the show that didn't quite track with me, all right? So Poindexter has been impersonating Daredevil, going around discrediting Daredevil's reputation by being basically a murderer most of the season. Daredevil is going to try one last gambit to get to Fisk when he's going to be out in public and conceivably vulnerable when Fisk is going to get married to Vanessa at this big event. So prior to this, Daredevil manipulates Poindexter into basically becoming his cruise missile. He's going to point Poindexter at Fisk to try to sort of soften things up ahead of Daredevil making a play against Fisk at this event. Now, Daredevil isn't a murderer. We've never seen him kill anyone. He's come close, and he's wanted to. He never has. The fact that he would be okay with pointing what he knew to be a psychopathic killer at a public event where there would be both corrupt FBI agents but also innocent people, and be okay with that as a front to allow him to get through security. Like basically he was going to let Poindexter, Bullseye, do all the hard work of clearing a path to Fisk so that Daredevil wouldn't have to do it. The fact that he was okay with setting up a psychopathic killer to mow through a whole host of innocent people, potentially, that didn't make any sense to me. That was one part of this that I was kind of like, I don't see how that isn't blood on Matt's hands if anybody gets killed in the process of this. And we've already seen this guy kill innocent people, mainly the priest, amongst a dozen others or more at this point. So that was one of the weaker parts of the progression of the story to me, was Matt being okay with letting loose this animal in a public setting, essentially, and hoping, I guess, that he wouldn't murder anybody innocent. Didn't make a lot of sense. But aside from that, aside from the Nazi conversation, and aside from the minor quibble I have with maybe a continuity problem regarding the priest and Matt's past relationship with him, yeah, everything about this season from stem to stern was well done, well executed, well acted. I never felt bored. I never felt like I was watching something that was completely unnecessary. Like I say, the Nazi kind of thing was bewildering, but it played into the plot a little bit. Since they'd already established Wilson Fisk a lot, they could spend more time with establishing Bullseye without feeling like you were missing something with the other characters, because we've seen a lot of them, and there's not much more to tell there. But yeah, watching Matt's rebirth and struggles with his sense of failure, his sense of betrayal, his sense of being a protector, but also really liking beating the shit out of people. All these things are thrown in the mix. And I got to say, the lady who played Sister Maggie, Daredevil's mom, surprise, surprise, she did an excellent job. I mean, for a while there, I thought we were going to have some sort of like a critique of, I'm a strong, independent woman that don't need no man kind of stuff. But no, she was a full-fledged, flawed character, smart cookie. There's some scenes where she puts herself in harm's way, and you see this tiny little nun standing in front of these FBI guys, and especially a psychopath like Poindexter. And you're just like, this lady is either nuts or just made of the toughest fucking naga hide. It was just great. But yeah, I don't know that I have much else to say. This is one of those rare situations where I'm not doing a stream that I called why so-and-so was bad. Daredevil season 3 isn't bad. It's not bad. Got a couple of little moments, but overall, it really does a credit to the source material. It really pays respect to the characters as established to this point. It really does a good job of establishing Bullseye. So yeah, it's great. Highly recommended. Up there with season 1. Like I say, you could almost watch season 1 and season 3 back to back, and you probably wouldn't miss a whole heck of a lot. You probably wouldn't feel all that much lost. A couple of references here and there to previous things, but one practically leads into the other. Now, speculation time. As many of you probably know, both Iron Fist and Luke Cage have been canceled. Those shows have been canceled at Netflix. Does this mean we'll never see the characters again? Don't know. Does this mean that they're getting rid of those two shows as individual entities and they're going to start up a Heroes for Hire unified show with those two characters? Don't know. They seem to be hinting at that in places in Iron Fist or in The Defenders and Luke Cage season 2. I don't know how well they could have established that possibility given how season 2 of Luke Cage ended and how season 2 of Iron Fist ended. But, bad writing has saved such things before. But season 4 of Daredevil. Will there be a season 4 of Daredevil? Well, they're filming season 3 of Jessica Jones right now. They're doing season 2 of Punisher. So those are already on the block. Will those shows survive into future seasons? Don't know. But what could happen in a season 4 of Daredevil? Well, at the end of season 3, we're given, obviously, that Bullseye, Poindexter, having his spine snapped by Wilson Fisk in the final fight, which was a really good fight, by the way. As per the comic books, he's paralyzed. And as in the comic books at the end of season 3, we see he's having his spine worked on by some scientists who are going to replace it with some metal. In the comic books, I believe he had parts of his spine or skeleton replaced with adamantium, I think. I think they've changed the name of the metal because I think that's still owned by Fox at this point, who owns all the X-Men stuff. But yeah, so more likely than not, Bullseye returns. So again, season 4, Bullseye will be a threat. I think Bullseye comes back, and he'll actually be Bullseye. He'll finally get his suit some way, shape, or form. I also think that Melvin Potter will come back, now fully fledged as an antagonist for Daredevil. I think since Daredevil sent Miss Betsy away, who was Melvin's parole officer in this iteration, he'll blame Daredevil for getting rid of Miss Betsy, especially if something happens to Miss Betsy. And Melvin may actually become the Gladiator, which was his supervillain persona in the comic books, and finally get his sort of mechanical suit with the buzzsaws and everything that's been sort of hinted at in season 1 and season 3. Also, a character that was kind of left by the wayside from season 1, which would really be nice to have a payoff, is Leland Owlsley's son, Lee Owlsley, or Leland Owlsley II or something. If we actually get the Owl show up, if he's the one that's backing or paying for either Bullseye's recovery or to get Melvin Potter out of prison, because Leland Owlsley knew about Melvin Potter. From season 1, he got his suit done by him. So if his son knew about Melvin Potter, that might be a good thing. Now, why would the Owl come into the situation? I mean, by all rights, Leland Owlsley's son would have more of a beef with Wilson Fisk for killing his father than taking out Daredevil. So I'm not quite sure what the logic would be there for the Owl to come in and want to take out Daredevil, unless it was he was coming in to, I don't know, somehow tear down Wilson Fisk's empire or something in revenge, or I don't know, just take up his father's work somehow and become a a financier for the underworld. Another aspect of season 4 we could see is Rosalie Carbone. Rosalie Carbone is a crime boss who was established in Luke Cage season 2 near the very end in an awkward sort of way. And she shows up again here in season 3 of Daredevil. I presume she will show up in season 2 of Punisher, just because Rosalie Carbone and the Carbone family was so significant to the Punisher story. I could see her also becoming a threat to Daredevil if Punisher doesn't take her out in season 2 of Punisher. Thank you, Earl Walton. Great stream and great insights. I look forward to your summaries of this type of material as much as I enjoy the material itself. I would love to see a collab between you and Polydub on this stuff. Well, thank you so much, Earl. You know, I've said this before. I am so gratified to be living in a time where I get to see all of these characters and scenarios and adventures that I enjoyed in comic books as a kid finally be brought to life in sometimes an excellent way, like season 3 of Daredevil here. I'm also gratified to see it when it's not so good. You know, I didn't like season 1 of Iron Fist, didn't like season 2, wasn't that jazzed with the way they did the Punisher. But the fact that they are brought to life gives me something to not only look forward to, but as much as I love praising those times when they get it right, I do enjoy complaining about it when I think they get it wrong. So there you go. I think my Punisher season 1 review is one of my favorites of the stuff that I've done so far, because it just, as I did it and as I listened to it from time to time, I'm reminded about just how much of a Punisher nut I am, and how much I love that character, and how much that comes across. And sort of as I give a summary at the beginning of the review of the character for anybody who doesn't know, and then contrast that with what they did in the show. But anyway, yeah. So thank you so much, Earl. As I stumble over my words, I better save my voice because I'll be doing Lords of the Night here in about an hour and a half. But yeah, season 4, I don't know. I'm glad they canceled Iron Fist. I'm glad they canceled Luke Cage. I think those Iron Fist as an entire project to me was an abject failure. Luke Cage started taking a downturn at the halfway point of season 1, and season 2 was such a mess to me of storytelling that I don't know. I just wasn't that impressed. You can see that on my previous reviews. If they decide to retool those characters and bring them in as a heroes for hire kind of thing, again, it could work. And I take on each of these seasons as their own monsters, because just like with runs in comic books, if a comic book changes writers and changes artists, you could go from 17 issues of blah to a run that is epic and classic. So I'm always curious to see what new writers or a new take on the material might bring to a character, even if a previous attempt at running the character wasn't that great. So I looked forward to Iron Fist season 2. I was not disappointed in how bad it was, though. What I'd really like to see, I would really like to see a Ghost Rider show, a Blade show, a Moon Knight show, and then when they have their team up, they do the Midnight Suns and they go after like Mephisto or Blackheart or something. I don't know that we'll ever get that, but if there's a character that deserves his own show, it's Ghost Rider. After Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 4 or 5, whatever it was, man, Ghost Rider would be a great, if they could get Diego Luna back to play Ghost Rider, damn, that'd be great. Anyway, I'm starting to go off on tangents here because I've basically said everything I had to say about Daredevil Season 3. So I'm going to cut it off here, guys. Real quick, I'll go back to the chat. WR Costas, I have returned. Well, you just returned to hear me sign off. St. Fugi, damn, I missed a lot. Well, don't worry, Fugi. It'll all be here and archived here pretty quick. Beth Kaselman says, Blade already had his own show. He had his own show on Spike TV. It wasn't part of the Marvel continuity or anything. It was... But I think enough time has passed now that if Netflix or some other entity decided to bring it up and redo Blade, it'd be great, especially if they did it in conjunction with a supernatural genre going on, because a lot of that hasn't been delved into a whole lot yet. There's a whole sort of mystical supernatural side beyond just Iron Fist and Kunlun and everything that Marvel hasn't really delved into, short of the Doctor Strange movie and a little bit of Agents of Shield when they have the Darkhold and everything. I think there's a whole mini shared universe they could do with that if they really gave it a shot. But time will tell. Justin Real says, "Damn it, I was sorting cards listening to this, and now you got to go." Yeah, sorry guys. Again, if I had bad things to say about this, I'd go on longer, but I really don't. Aside from the things that I mentioned that kind of threw me off a little bit, this is a great season. Much better than season 2. A companion piece at worst to season 1, just for how good it is and how it still extends the characters and really does them respect. And like I say, watching season 1, 2, Defenders, and 3, seeing the evolution of these characters, seeing how little hints of stories that are mentioned in season 1 finally get a payoff of a kind in season 3, and also seeing what could happen if there's a season 4. Yeah, I really have my fingers crossed there will be a season 4, and crossed as well that it's not a retread of quality of season 2. Which again wasn't awful as compared to all the other Netflix shows, but as compared to season 1, season 2 was kind of in places. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing what happens, what they do with season 2 of Punisher and season 3 of Jessica Jones, as much as it's going to be a slog. I imagine those are coming out early next year, I think, if not maybe sooner, depending. They've surprised us before, so we'll see. But otherwise, hope everyone's having a good day. Hope to see you all on Lords of the Night tonight or any night in the future. And I'll talk to you guys later. Take care.